The floor dropped beneath me, fiancé. I stood there frozen, watching them walk upstairs together to the master's bedroom. I was never allowed to enter because it was under renovation. Anthony came back down a few minutes later, his face cold and indifferent. Amaka, you need to leave. I was too stunned to speak. My voice cracked as I asked him why he was doing this. He scoffed and said, "You think I have forgotten how you embarrassed me years ago? You thought you could use me and then throw me away. You're nothing but a gold digger." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. He threw me out and with nowhere else to go. I found myself standing in front of Madu's door, broken and humiliated. Waking up at 5 a.m. on a damp Monday morning, I felt the familiar weight of reality crashing down on me as the smell from the gutter outside our window hit me. Chai, Amaka, you be momo. When your mates they follow men, we get money, na handsome man you go follow. See your life now. Staring at the peeling ceiling, too tired to move, too tired to cry. The weight of the years of endless struggle crushed me as I lay in our cramped one-room apartment. Madu, still asleep beside me, looked so peaceful. His handsome face, even in the dim light of the morning, could have fooled anyone into thinking life was good for us. But good looks don't put food on the table, does it? And they sure as hell don't make up for the misery we're living in. Amaka, how did you get here? I said to myself again, feeling the bitterness rise in my throat. There was a time when I believed Mado's charm and intelligence would take us somewhere. When I sold everything my parents left me, I thought I was investing in our future. But that dream crumbled like everything else, destroyed by one government policy after another, and with it our hopes and dreams. 5 years, 5 long years in this marriage, every day was a battle, and I was tired of fighting. Madu tried. I knew he did, but his efforts weren't enough. We lived off my 50,000 naira monthly salary, barely enough to scrap by, and every month seemed harder than the last. My heart had turned cold. Bitterness my constant companion. I wanted to stay in bed, but I couldn't. There was work to do, always work to do. Get up, Amaka, get up. I scolded myself, dragging my body out of bed as quietly as I could, not wanting to wake him. I made my way to the tiny kitchen, the one I knew too well, where every pot had seen better days, where I cooked the same meals over and over because variety was a luxury we couldn't afford. As I sliced the yams, my hands shaking slightly, I thought about how different things could have been. Each clatter of a spoon, each scrape of the knife against the cutting board seemed to fuel my anger. This wasn't the life I had imagined. When I married Madu, how could I have been so naive? I was once the envy of other women, and now here I was, cooking in a cramped kitchen, daydreaming about a life that never came to be. When Madu finally stirred, his footsteps soft as he entered the kitchen, I could feel the anger building up. He stood there, rubbing his eyes, and I snapped. "Why are you just standing there? Can't you see I'm busy? Do something useful for once in your life." The words flew out of my mouth before I could stop them. His face fell. I saw the pain flicker in his eyes, but he didn't argue. He never did. Madu just nodded, his shoulders dropping, and walked out of the kitchen like a scolded child. I hated myself in that moment. I hated how I had become this angry, bitter woman who lashed out at her husband. But I couldn't stop. I was too tired of being the only one who held everything together, of carrying the weight of our lives on my shoulders alone. Madu wasn't lazy, and deep down, I knew that. He worked odd jobs whenever he could, and I could see how much he wanted to make things better. But nothing changed. We were stuck. And I couldn't help but remind him of it every chance I got. And the worst part, he took it all in silence. He absorbed my anger, my frustration, as if he deserved it. I could see the guilt in his eyes, the way he blamed himself for everything. He loved me. I knew that. But love didn't feel like enough anymore. Not when every day felt like a struggle to survive. One raining morning, while hurrying off to work, drenched and frustrated because no bus would stop for me, A sleek, luxurious car pulled up beside me. I ignored it at first, but when the driver honked persistently, I turned to see who was behind the wheel. My heart skipped a beat. It was Anthony, one of the men I had turned down for Madu. Shame washed over me as I recognized him. Anthony had once pursued me relentlessly, but I didn't find him attractive then. He wasn't as handsome as Madu, and his acne-riddled face didn't help. But before me now, behind the wheel of that luxurious car, he looks like a different man. Clear skin, broad shoulders, a thick beard, and an aura of success. He rolled down the window and smiled. Amaka, he called out softly. Get in. Let me take you out of this ring. I hesitated, but eventually I slid into the warm, dry car. I couldn't talk much during the ride. The silence felt heavy with unspoken words, my embarrassment clear as day. I couldn't stop thinking about how different our lives were now. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, hissing under my breath at my fate. My mind kept drifting back to Anthony, his success, his glow up. I reflected on how far my life had fallen, how Madu's failure had dragged us both down. The next day at work, I was shocked to see Anthony again. He was waiting for me as I was about to head home. This time, he wasn't just offering a ride. He was taking me out. I couldn't say no. The butterflies in my stomach flapped widely as he handed me flowers and held the door open like a perfect gentleman. Anthony, you know I'm married, right? And who says married women don't deserve to be treated like queens? He responded with a grin. That one line had me blushing like a schoolgirl. It felt so good to be appreciated, to feel feminine again. That night, when I got home, I was on a high. I haven't felt so light in years. I sang in the bathroom to Madu's surprise and even put on my favorite vanilla perfume before bed when Madu reached out to touch me, something I had denied him for months. I didn't push him away. For the first time in ages, I craved his touch and we made love with the thoughts of Anthony in my head. But by the next morning, I was back to my bitter self. When I woke up with Madu cuddling me, I felt suffocated. And before I could stop myself, I lashed out at him, hurling insults before storming off to work. At work, Anthony filled my thoughts again as I opened the gifts he sent through a courier. The way he spoke that one line that made me blush. The way his firm chest struggled to bust the button of his tight shirt, and how chivalrous he is. I thought of waking up in his arms after a long night of pleasure, and just then his call came in, and I answered eagerly. He asked if I liked the gifts he had sent, an expensive iPhone and a few other luxurious items. I was lost in the fantasy of what life could be with him. Madu, of course, noticed the changes in me. I was hot and cold. Affectionate 1 minute and cruel the next. He noticed the new phone and the gifts, and when he asked where they came from, I was dismissive and rude. And when he asked if I was cheating, I snapped. And if I am I wrong too? That broke him. I saw it in his eyes, the disbelief and pain, but he still refused to believe that I could ever betray him. It all came crashing down one raining afternoon. I was out with Anthony when Madu called me repeatedly. When I finally picked up, I was met with his panicked voice. Our daughter was in the hospital fighting for her life. I rushed out of the restaurant with Anthony insisting on driving me to the hospital. When we got there, Madu's face fell as he saw us together. He recognized Anthony instantly, the man who had once warned him to leave me alone. The doctor came out and told us that we needed to deposit 500,000 naira before they could proceed with our daughter's treatment. My heart fell. Madu broke down in tears. He didn't have the money, and neither did I. But Anthony stepped in without hesitation, making a 700,000 naira deposit. I felt a flood of gratitude as I ran into his arms, ignoring the stares of Madu, the doctors and the nurses. At that moment, it didn't matter if I was Madu's wife. Anthony had saved my child. Later that night, I went back to Anthony's place and rewarded him in the only way I knew how. I was determined to make him feel like a king for what he had done. It was wrong, I also knew that, but I was too far gone, too caught up in the fantasy of what my life could be. That day, something inside me had snapped. As I made my decision, I couldn't take it anymore. The constant anger, the bitterness I felt towards Madu, and the frustration of living a life I no longer wanted. Anthony had saved our daughter's life when Madu couldn't even pay the hospital bill. It felt like fate was showing me a way out, and I would be damned if I don't take it. He made me feel seen, appreciated, like a woman again. The way he looks at me makes my heart race. Madu never looks at me that way anymore. Like I was desirable, like I mattered. Anthony did. I remember walking into the hospital the next morning with bags of beverages, wearing his cologne, ready to show Madu how a real man smelt. Our daughter was discharged after a few days, and as I packed my things, I knew my mind was made up. I couldn't stay in a life where I was constantly angry, trapped, and dependent on the man who couldn't even take care of us. I wouldn't be that woman. I refused to be that woman. A few days later, I stood in our one-room apartment, the air heavy with finality. As I packed my bags, Madu walked in, confusion clouding his face as he noticed the cab waiting outside. His eyes darted to my suitcase and then to me, disbelief setting in. "Amaka, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. I didn't look up. My hands continued to fold close and shove them into my bag. "I'm leaving, Madu. I can't do this anymore." His face fell, and I could see the fear crippling in his eyes. "Amaka, please. You can't just leave. We're a family." I stopped, turning to face him. "A family, Madu. You couldn't even pay our daughter's hospital bills." Anthony stepped in like a real man that he is, and he made me realize I deserve more. I deserve a life where I'm not angry all the time. I can't live like this anymore, and I won't. His face crumbled, tears swelling in his eyes. He stepped closer, his voice breaking. "Please, Amaka, don't do this. I will fix it. I will get a better job. I will make things right." I shook my head. "It's too late. I have made up my mind. Anthony promised me everything I have ever wanted, and I refuse to stay in a marriage where I'm always angry and bitter." He sobbed, dropping to his knees in front of me, grabbing my dress. "Please, don't leave me. Don't leave us. We can fix this. I swear. I love you. I love our family. Please, Amaka." Neighbors began to gather, drawn by the commotion. They tried to talk to me, tried to persuade me to stay. But I was done. My mind was made up. I had already moved on in my heart. With one final look at Madu, I pulled my dress from his grasp and walked out the door without looking back at him, leaving him kneeling on the floor. His cries and that of my little daughter shouting "Mommy" echoing in my mind as I climbed into the car Anthony sent to get me. Living with Anthony was everything I had expected it to be. He showered me with gifts, got me a job as his assistant in his company, and made sure I didn't lack anything. I had my freedom, my independence, and a man who gave me everything Madu couldn't. I visited our daughter from time to time, sent money to Madu, because no matter what, I still loved my child, and Madu was still the man I once decided to stand by. Madu, on the other hand, was struggling. He cried often, and every time I visited to see our daughter, I could see the pain in his eyes, the emptiness in his heart. But I pushed it aside, telling myself he would be fine, he was strong, he would move on. Then Madu started to change. He began taking courses, applying for jobs, determined to prove that he could be the man I once needed him to be. In 6 months, he landed a job, and I could see the hope in his eyes again, the determination that had once attracted me to him. Meanwhile, I was reveling in my new life. I had Anthony, I had a good job, and everything seemed perfect. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen cooking with Anthony when I heard a knock at the door. Wiping my hands on the towel, I went to answer it. When I opened the door, I was stunned. Standing before me was the most elegant, classy woman I had ever seen. She looked like she stepped out of a magazine, poised, beautiful, and completely out of place in my world. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Before I could respond, Anthony rushed out, his face lighting up. "Baby, you didn't tell me you were back from the UK." "Well, now you know. Who is this?" Anthony pecked her cheek, turning to me with a casual smile. Oh, Amaka, she's nobody. Just my assistant from the office. She visits sometimes to help me with a few house chores and cook. Anthony reassured her. Amaka, this is my fiancée. She's been away for her masters, but now she's back. Please, give her as much respect as you give me. The floor dropped beneath me. Fiancé. I stood there frozen, watching them walk upstairs together to the master's bedroom I was never allowed to enter because it was under renovation, according to Anthony. Anthony came back down a few minutes later, his face cold and indifferent. Amaka, you need to leave. I was too stunned to speak. My voice cracked as I asked him why he was doing this. He scoffed and said, You think I've forgotten how you embarrassed me years ago? You thought you could use me and then throw me away? You're nothing but a gold digger. His words hit me like a ton of bricks. He threw me out and with nowhere else to go. I found myself standing in front of Madu's door, broken and humiliated. Madu let me in for the sake of our daughter, but he wouldn't speak to me, wouldn't even look at me most days. I spent my time crying, wallowing in my regrets. I had destroyed everything. One evening, Madu approached me as I sat outside, staring blankly at the moon. He sat beside me quietly, and for the first time in months, I opened up. I poured out all my pains, my regrets, my shame. I begged for his forgiveness, and that night, we made love again, just like old times, and this time, my mind was fully with Madu. I woke up the next morning, hopeful, thinking that maybe, just maybe, things could go back to the way they were. I cooked, I cleaned, I tried to make our home a home again, just like a good wife would. But Madu was distant. He pretended as though nothing had happened between us. Later that afternoon, a moving van pulled up outside our compound. I watched in confusion as Madu packed his belongings and our daughters. Madu, what is this? Where are you going? I asked, panic rising. Madu didn't respond at first. He kept packing, slowly folding clothes and stacking them neatly into a box. I stood frozen, watching in disbelief as he packed up our daughter's belongings as well. My heart pounded in my chest, the fear rising with every passing second. Madu, I'm talking to you. Where are you going? I repeated, my voice cracking with desperation. Finally, he stopped and turned to face me. His expression calm but unreadable. His eyes held none of the warmth or love I once knew, only a chilling detachment that made my stomach churn. Amaka, I can't do this anymore, he said quietly. His voice was steady, but the words hit me like a sledgehammer. I stayed for our daughter, but even she deserves better than this. I deserve better. Madu, no, please, I begged, rushing to his side. I clung to his arm, but he gently pulled away from my grasp. I'm sorry, I have changed, I swear. I will make it right. Please, don't leave me. He shook his head slowly, sadness clouding his eyes for a moment. It's too late, Amaka. You broke us. You broke me. I loved you so much, but you took that love and crushed it. You chose someone else, and now you have to live with the consequences. Tears streamed down my face as I fell to my knees, sobbing uncontrollably. The reality of my actions came crashing down around me. I had destroyed everything. Our marriage, our family, the love Madu once had for me. And now he was leaving. Madu, please don't do this. I'll be a better wife. I'll be the woman you fell in love with. I will change, I swear. I cried, my voice barely audible through the sobs. For Madu was unmoved. He picked up the last box and walked towards the door, our daughter trailing behind him with her little suitcase. Amaka, we still have 6 months until the rent for this place expires. You can stay and pick up the pieces of your life together, he said. But before he left, he turned to me one last time. I forgive you, Amaka, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. I would always care about you, but I can't live with someone who doesn't respect me. I hope you find peace. And just like that, he was gone. The door closed and I was left alone in the empty apartment. The silence deafening. For the next few days, I wandered through the apartment like a ghost. The quietness was unbearable. I no longer had Madu to lash out at, no daughter to care for. The guilt, the regret weighed heavily on my chest, suffocating me. I had pushed away the one man who truly loved me, the one person who stood by me even when I didn't deserve it. And now I was alone. Weeks turned into months, and the loneliness became my constant companion. I had lost everything: my family, my self respect, my dignity. Madu had moved on, and from what I heard through mutual friends, he and our daughter were doing well. He had found peace while I remained trapped in my own misery. I thought about Anthony sometimes, that stupid man, about how foolish I had been to think he could offer me happiness. He had only used me, just as I had used him. But I couldn't blame him entirely. I had made my choices, and now I had to live with the consequences. One evening, as I sat alone in the dimly lit apartment, staring at the faded walls, I made my decision. I couldn't change the past, but I could try to rebuild what little was left of my life. I needed to stop wallowing in self-pity and start taking responsibilities for my actions. I stood by the well, gripping the cold iron handle, pulling water in silence the next day. Each drop that fell into the bucket seemed to echo louder than my thoughts, which had grown quieter these past months. 6 months, I had spent them trying to piece together what was left of me, of my life after everything fell apart. The emptiness was overwhelming at first, but somehow I managed. I forgave myself. As I lifted the bucket, the soft rumble of an engine pulled me out of my misery. I turned, and there it was, a sleek black car pulling up in front of our compound. It wasn't the kind of car that frequented these dusty corners of Lagos, and immediately I thought it was Anthony. I was prepared to give him a piece of my mind. But instead of Anthony, Madu stepped out, looking nothing like the broken man I knew. His clothes were sharp, his posture tall, confident, so different from the hunched, defeated figure I had grown accustomed to. I couldn't move. My breath caught in my chest, and for a moment, all I could do was stare. He had changed, but then again, hadn't we both? Our eyes locked across the distance. Neither of us spoke. I dropped my eyes to the bucket in my hands. I couldn't help but wonder what the future could hold. I wasn't sure where we stood or if we ever had the chance to rebuild what was broken. But his presence after all this time felt like a quiet promise. Maybe it was a promise of forgiveness, or maybe just understanding. I didn't know. But for the first time in months, I felt like there was hope. He still hadn't moved. He just stood there, watching me, waiting. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't afraid of the uncertainty anymore. Whatever happened next, I would face it. Because if Madu's presence could teach me anything, it was that some things, even broken, still had the potential to become whole again. But for now, we just stood there, unsure of what came next. The future, it was unclear. Yet, deep down, I knew that somehow, it held the possibility of something better.